Okay, gentlemen, this is your report on the financial apocalypse and things have occurred. The Bank of International Settlements, or BIS, has officially announced its decision to dump MBridge, which will go down in history as one of the most crucial blunders. The economic war is currently being fought on several fronts, including tariffs on electric vehicles, semiconductor restrictions, and price limits on Russian oil. The United States, for example, is determined to wage a trade war with China, bringing manufacturing home at whatever cost. These are the same experts who said that shipping our entire manufacturing industry to China, East Asia, and Mexico would lead to greater American prosperity. They were wrong, and it was a mistake to do so. We followed their advice, and now, frankly, many Americans cannot afford a good life or earn a middle-class wage because we listened to some of those same people. This will be a contentious issue, but I believe the most crucial part is controlling the flow of money, which includes how and where your competitors and opponents transact. If you can keep control of this, you can have a significant impact on world trade. Turkish banks, for example, are leery of interacting with Russian commerce because they are concerned about U.S. sanctions affecting them and disrupting operations. The majority of commerce now happens via Western intermediary banks, whether they are U.S. or EU banks. Money flows through them, and if you are a Turkish bank, you may want to reconsider boosting trade. As a decision maker in Washington, the last thing you want to lose is financial dominance. It's one of the few things you still have. You must not jeopardize the position of the dollar. Your industries are already failing, and your debt is incredibly huge. You need the rest of the world to use your currencies and invest their profits in Western assets. And here is where China is making gains. Even inside SWIFT, the Chinese yuan is becoming the major currency used to fund commerce. While the US dollar remains dominating at 83%, the euro and China's RMB are practically equal, both at roughly 5.7%. Countries throughout the world, including on the SWIFT platform, are increasingly preferring to utilize China's currency, which makes sense. China is the world's largest commercial partner, but the West has just made a fatal mistake. We learned a few days ago that the Bank of International Settlements, or BIS, is exiting the MBridge payments project. The majority of participants are from BRICS nations, and there was a frenzy here. When Putin identified it as a conduit for dinerization, the BIS wanted out. The Bank of International Settlements has formally abandoned the initiative, leaving it to BRICS to pick up the pieces. MBridge will now be managed by the remaining members, which include China, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Understand what a huge mistake this is for the West. The MBridge system is designed to be a black box for trading, connecting central banks without the requirement for a commercial middleman. This is a Minsky moment for Western currencies and payment systems. It is a watershed moment in which things begin to go wrong for them. MBridge is now effectively under Chinese control. Beijing desupplied the platform's backbone and technology, ensuring that it can always be linked to other elements of their financial network. HSBC, for example, has joined China's SIPS payment system, which is an alternative to SWIFT. It links commercial banks, financial institutions, and corporations, allowing commercial organizations to conduct business with China even if SWIFT excludes the nation. So you now have a marriage of central banks to central banks, as well as commercial companies from across the world to China, and this can be done without BIS monitoring, implying that everything will remain under the radar in the future. What scares the West are the other members, the UAE and Saudi Arabia. We can be confident that China will begin utilizing MBridge to pay oil trades in currencies other than dollars. In September, the Saudi Minister of Industry stated that Saudi Arabia is open to the concept of a petro-yuan. To strengthen its connections with China, the kingdom is prepared to sell barrels of oil in Chinese RMB rather than dollars. This has not yet been done formally, as there is still a lot of volatility in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia cannot afford to do it in public. They still require U.S. security, particularly given the current Iran-Israel crisis. However, the MBridge system just facilitates transfers between central banks, and the G7 won't be unaffected. The BIS made a major error here. If I were the US, I'd want to know what the Chinese are doing with MBridge. But any progress will be made in the shadows. China uses a lot of Middle Eastern oil, as we all know, and this gives it a lot of leverage. Beijing has been the largest consumer of Saudi oil exports since 2021, with purchases increasing dramatically. China buys over $50 billion in oil each year, accounting for nearly 85% of total imports from the monarchy. Now that MBridge is in the hands of China and Saudi Arabia, what do you think is the most logical next step, especially since there is no oversight? It would not be shocking if their central banks began coordinating and arranging oil for yuan exchanges. The petro-yuan concept has become considerably more viable, but there is another stunning piece of news to discuss. India is taking home the gold. The Reserve Bank of India has returned more than 100 tons of gold to domestic vaults. It's a momentous departure, and it foreshadows future events. Gold is a straightforward asset with one basic rule. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. London may be the financial center for gold, but it makes no difference. They have the world's largest vaults and gold exchange, but India removed its reserves and has a ton more to send home. India possesses around 860 tons of gold, but only 510 are held locally. Therefore, additional gold from the UK will likely be transported back. India used to store its gold in London as collateral to raise funds for the economy. The metal is kept in a vault, while other central banks send checks to the RBI using the gold as collateral. India's debt had been paid off for decades, but the gold remained in the UK, in vaults. Now, the RBI claims it is an accounting action rather than a political one, but we know that governments all around the world are repatriating their gold. Since the beginning of the year, gold has returned at least 30%. The price increased from roughly $2,000 to more over $2,750 today, representing a significant gain. And, given the global turmoil, a central bank would prefer to keep its gold at home. The value of your gold has increased significantly, and no matter how friendly you are with the UK or the US, you may face financial consequences. Let's not forget about Venezuela's gold, which is still stranded in the UK. Venezuela has almost $2 billion trapped in London. It's a lengthy court struggle that's still ongoing. The United Kingdom does not recognize Maduro as president, hence the gold is not being released. It's a really complex scenario, and it serves as a reminder of the fundamental law of gold ownership. If you don't possess it, you don't own it. Now that India owes no obligation to the UK and the gold is not security for a loan, the best option is to return it home. There's no use leaving it in London and exposing yourself to counterparty risk. And this takes us back to the primary subject at hand, the BIS dumping what remains of MBridge in China. It will be a regrettable miscalculation for the West. Consider the implications of bilateral trading outside of Western currencies. There will be less need to keep traditional reserve assets, with decreased demand for government bonds and increased demand for gold. Over the last 2 years, we've seen Russian reserves stolen, Russia booted out of SWIFT, and Chinese trade restrictions increased. The entire financial system is being utilized for geopolitical purposes, and central banks throughout the world are not happy about it. According to an Invesco study, central banks around the world delivered a strong rebuke to the Western financial order. Central banks in Asia and developing markets reacted the most strongly. China is clearly on the list. They concluded that weaponizing reserves poses a significant risk to US dollar supremacy. Even Western central banks see this as an issue. Eastern European countries, such as Hungary, are likely to experience difficulty sleeping after 2022. You may be a good buddy of the US or the G7 today, but tomorrow is unpredictable, and your reserves in dollar assets could vanish like a cheap magic act. Central banks have stated that they want to expand their reserves during the next several years. 37% of respondents will purchase more, 63% will keep their holdings, and none would sell any gold. And if this is not a hint, I'm not sure what is. The study then takes an unusual turn, asking central banks why they retain gold, and sure, they ask the Voldemort question, the unthinkable question. Is the weaponization of central bank reserves increasing the appeal of gold? Out of 45 respondents, the majority replied yes. More than half of respondents believe that the G7 penalties have made gold more appealing. It's a major reason that despite growing U.S. debt levels, having your deposits stolen is a greater danger than the likelihood of a government debt collapse. Knowing this allows us to make a number of predictions about the future. The gold market would continue to be supported by central bank purchases, and it may even expand in 2025. If the U.S. makes a move against China and weaponizes the financial system again, we could see demand skyrocket. Central banks will buy more bullion, and I'm confident they won't store it in a vault in New York or London. Instead, they will take the gold reserves back home with them, which is the only logical thing to do. So we must constantly monitor the economic conflict, since China and Russia are developing their own banking networks outside of the West. And with MBridge now in Eastern hands, we have no clue how much commerce will take place outside of the currency. For all we know, the Saudis may sell oil to China and settle in RMB. What remains obvious is the quantity of reserves stored in dollars. According to the IMF, dollar holdings peaked at 66% in 2015, but have subsequently fallen to 58%. During the same era, the price of gold has risen due to central bank purchases, which is not a coincidence. It appears to be a slow-burning process, but Trump is the ultimate wild card in 2025, and he is likely to win. And with him comes the ultimate threat: abandon the dollar, and the United States will punish you. So hang on, folks, because things are about to get insane. But tell me what you think. Did the West make a major error with MBridge, and how can China turn this scenario around? Please let me know in the comments, remain safe, and remember to like and subscribe as we traverse these tumultuous times.